Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'd like to kick things off by asking State Representative John Petusik, Air Force veteran, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hoorah!
Thank you. So I'd like to begin by welcoming all of you. Welcome to the New Hampshire Institute of Politics. Welcome on behalf of the 603 Alliance, which is holding this event. I want to begin by providing a little bit of background. This event was initially conceived as a debate. We felt that being in New Hampshire, the first in the nation primary, gives us a unique opportunity to see the candidates and hear from the candidates. So we decided we were going to hold an event in which we would invite the presidential candidates to come talk about climate change. So we invited all of the presidential candidates who were polling at 1% or higher. There were about 8 or 10 of those, I think. Several of them declined politely. Several of them did not respond. We also invited Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That invitation was hand-delivered by one of our congressional representatives, Amy Tester. We did not hear a response. And that didn't surprise us terribly, that these folks were busy and have a lot to do. So in our next step, we set out to invite some climate experts. So we invited some environmental science professors, some climatologists, and what really was very interesting were some of the responses that we got. So we have prepared a short video just to kick things off that I think will give you a sense of what we're encountering as we encourage people to engage in this debate. So give me just a moment, we'll play that video now.
The water might rise and it might flood the whole town.
We won't be able to survive for long.
We'll all die.
Are there some people who say this isn't true?
Yes. Yes.
Might they be right?
No.
How do you know they're not right?
Well, because the earth is getting hotter.
In the spring of 2019, floodwaters devastated America's farmlands.
This is, and for the record books, this topped all the records.
It's just the latest in a series of record-breaking storms in a region that has seen extreme temperatures, snowfall, and rain. For farmers in the heartland struggling to stay afloat, the realities of a changing climate are getting harder to deny.
Every single event is being used like this. It's going to continue to be used. I'll tell you why. Because people don't know what happened before in the weather. If you don't know what happened before, you know the old saying, you got to stand for something, you fall for anything. You'll fall for this stuff. And a lot of people say, oh, this is the worst thing I've ever seen.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. Like, this is the war. This is our World War II.
I don't believe that climate change is our biggest problem because I don't believe that man has anything to do with it. Climate has changed since before man existed on the planet and will continue when man is gone.
As a professional climate scientist who's done this for 50 years, I'm afraid you're not correct. The climate evidence is very, very clear. And probably the clearest evidence of all comes from ancient records where you can actually see what the planet was like before humans were involved. This is why climate scientists, 99% on almost every study of climate scientists, shows that we're as unanimous as the scientific community ever gets
97% of climate scientists agree humans are causing global warming. It's one of the most famous statistics in all of science that experts, the people who know the most about Earth's climate, agree almost universally that humans are warming the planet.
We have Holocaust deniers, we have climate change deniers, and to be honest, I don't think there's a great deal of difference.
Deniers are confusing the issue and delaying solutions.
Is this what the global warming debate has come to? One side saying, shut up, dissent must not be heard.
The debate's over. The debate's over.
Lots of good scientists don't agree that it's mostly our fault, and don't agree that it's going to be a catastrophe.
That summarizes what our experience has been in this process. So we genuinely did set out to have a fair and even-handed debate on climate change. And so this is pretty indicative of the responses that we got. We did get one person, gentleman from the Citizens Climate Lobby here in New Hampshire, who said that he would agree to voice that side of the argument. He also acknowledged that he was not really an expert on the same level that some of these other responses are. So rather than having two against one, where one is really doesn't feel like he has the expertise to engage in that debate, we adjusted the format, and we have two great speakers. And to introduce them, I'd like to ask Diane Bitter to come up to the lectern.
Jim, can I just comment that I'm sure others have had the same effect. I try to get on the other side of some of these other people. They won't invite me. So it's...
Understood. Thanks.
It's fair.
Thank you, Jim.
Well,
thank you all for coming tonight. This is a wonderful crowd. It's so great to see all of you here tonight. And I have the honor and the pleasure to introduce our two very distinguished guests tonight who are going to be speaking to you about their experiences. Now, I hope you all got a copy of the program and you have seen the bio inside of our two speakers. So I will not regurgitate that because you've already read it. Instead, I'm going to give you a little bit of a different slant on these two gentlemen. And in speaking with them before the program, just tonight, I found out that they both have a very keen sense of humor. So I think you're in for a treat tonight when you listen to them. So I asked each of them, what drew you to this issue? What was it that prompted you to investigate this process and to come up with your conclusions? How did that develop? Well, Lord Monckton had an interesting story, and I hope I get it straight. In 2006, he was called by an entrepreneur, a businessman, who called him into his office and said, you know, we're hearing so much about this green aspect of life and our culture, and we're in serious trouble, they tell us. And so we want to find out if this is going to affect our business. How serious is this? And we want you to do a study. And so he said, well okay. And then they asked him, well, where do you stand on this subject? Do you believe that there is global warming and that man's responsible or partially responsible? And he said, well, I think it might be true, but I'd have to investigate it. I'd have to check it out. So they said, well, we want you to do that. And so he went off and he did his study, and he came back with an 80-page study, which they read. And in the process of his research, he had completely changed his mind. And so he then presented his report, and they said to him, well, you know, we had 12 people doing this same research, and you're the only one who came back with this decision. Everybody else was on their same page that, yes, this is indeed caused by man. But we want you to work with us because you're the only one who actually, we think, told the truth. And I may have embellished that a little bit, but that was his story, and I found that very interesting. When I asked Dr. or Mr. Bastardi how he came about this, he had a very simple explanation. It was a quote from his father, something his father taught him years ago. And I'm probably not going to get it exactly right, but I believe it goes something like this. The foundations for our beliefs today are based on yesterday's findings and prepare us for the future. I thought that was very profound. And so it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our two speakers. Please come on up to the stage. Lord Monkton and Mr. Bastardi.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Diane. So, when we look at the topic of climate change, I think we hear a number of different questions or topics that we could potentially disagree on. The first is that climate change is real, it's happening, and it's urgent. We need to do something about it. The second is, it's our fault. Human beings are causing global warming. The third is, if we take immediate action, we can remedy the situation. And we'd also like to talk about the question of what they call settled science. I almost did it myself. We had a call last week, and Don Ewing referred to it as settled silence, which I thought was a very apt slip of the tongue. So what we'd like to do, the format we'd like to go with this evening is to ask each of our speakers to address each of those topics in turn. We will have a Q&A session near the end. We expect a lot of the same questions, a lot of repeat questions, so we would ask that if you have a question, that you write it on one of the cards that was provided. We will have a kind of a short break and some announcements later in the program, and that will be your opportunity to hand those in. So you can write down your questions now, hold on to that card. If you don't have a card at that time, we'll give you an opportunity to raise your hand and we can get a card to you. So, without further ado then, let's proceed. I would like to ask perhaps if Lord Monkton, if you don't mind being our first speaker kicking it off, can you address the assertion that climate change is real and it is urgent? And excuse me while I fiddle with the laptop a little bit to get the slides
You
out.
give me a clicker. will
I
you?
have a clicker as well.
Good. And shall I speak from there or here?
Whatever you prefer.
I'll come up there. Well, the first question I'm asked to address is climate change urgent? Well, of course it is. We have no less an expert on this than Prince Charles. And of course, Alexandria occasionally correct. And what I would say to the Republicans as they look for their slogan for the 2020 elections, how about make Alexandria barkeep again? Well, now, as you will see from this slide here, supposed urgency is based on numerous exaggerated predictions. For instance, here is a slide which showed no global warming whatsoever between, for 18 years and 9 months, up to November 2015. None whatsoever. Yet a third of man's sins of emission had occurred over the same 18 years. Did this mean global warming had stopped? No, it's resumed since then. But what this does mean is that the rate at which it's happening is a great deal slower than they had predicted, and therefore, no, it's not as urgent as they had predicted. And here you can see that the actual warming rate over the last 30 years or so is a dazzling 1/8 of a Celsius degree per decade. It's not exactly something that's going to cause us to worry about rising sea levels or droughts or floods. This is simply well within the natural variability of the climate. And in fact, you can see that predicted warming on this sliding scale here is 3 times the warming that's been observed up until 2011. From 1850 to 2011, the green bar on the left there, that is what's actually been observed, and the red bar on the right of this sliding scale is what they predict as their central estimate. And the yellow and buff coloured areas of that dial are the range, the huge range of predictions that they are making. And as you can see, they haven't a clue how much global warming there's going to be, and it's certainly way, way, way over the top. Now, they've also made a very interesting internal error, which is that there is a difference between the direct warming you get from adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere straight away, and then the eventual or equilibrium warming you get after knock-on effects called temperature feedbacks have operated. And you multiply the original direct warming by a thing called the system gain factor, otherwise known as the closed loop gain if you're a control engineer, so as to convert that original warming into the final warming after feedbacks have acted. And if we do a sum based on their own estimates of net anthropogenic radiative forcing, the extra radiation knocking around in the atmosphere because of our sins of emission, and also the radiative imbalance, which is a measure of how much of that hasn't quite come through yet, because of delay caused by the enormous heat capacity of the ocean. Are you with me so far? We will be testing on this later. Well, their system gain factor is implicitly 1.3, and not the 3.2 they're telling us. And so what that means is that instead of getting 3.35 Kelvin or Celsius of global warming per doubling of CO2, we're only going to get 1.4 on the basis of their own data. So you can see that this urgency that they imagine arises purely from the fact that they are making predictions that are wildly inconsistent, not only with observation as we saw before, but here with the expectation that they would themselves would come up with on the basis of their own published data. This is an extraordinary discrepancy, which of course is not reported in the mainstream media.
So faced with this astonishing failure of prediction, they quietly halved their medium-term global warming predictions between 1990 and 2013, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, or IPCC as it's known. And what they didn't do is they didn't commensurately or at all halve their longer-term or equilibrium predictions. So you begin to see there is a deliberate dishonesty in all of this. Another thing we noticed was that the water vapor content of the upper air, about 6 miles up, which is predicted to increase by all the models, is actually declining. And this matters because that's where they think most of the extra knock-on warming, this feedback warming, is going to come from, only it can't, because the water vapor is simply not there to do it. Here you can see their predicted, this is called the tropical mid-troposphere hotspot. All the models predict this. None of them, in reality, are right because observations do not show that this hotspot exists. So we have these serious discrepancies between what is predicted, what is expected, and what is observed. And therefore, the conclusion from this is that until they have straightened out their own science, they have no case whatsoever for saying that climate change is urgent. Thank you.
You know what's funny is I was at the climate conference down in DC, and all I could think is during the lunch keynote by Lord Monckton, thank God I don't have to follow him. Because in the evening it was kind of dry, some awards giving out, so I got to have a little bit more fun. I want to read you something here that I think sums up this emergency. H.L. Mencken. The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary. All right? And then, of course, there's other quotes in my book. The urge to save humanity is almost always a false space for the urge to rule. And of course, I have a different kind of view on a lot of this. I think that this is evidence of some other things that are going on that want to increase the importance of what man does. All right? We're all born, all of us were born with an innate desire to be something bigger and better than what we are. And what I think has happened in this whole situation, you saw all those kids up there, and they're all convinced there's a climate emergency. I had an 8-year-old kid, my buddy, a kid I used to train when he was in college. He's not a kid anymore, he's 40, he's got an 8-year-old kid. He brings me home this book about rising seas and how everything is going to be flooded. And you know, I never understood what happened in Italy. I'm more expert on Italy than Germany, in Germany too. How those people, good people, all went one direction, right? You know, when you look at Germany, only 7% of Germans were the Nazi Party, and yet the entire country went the way they did. Now, I'm not trying to demonize the other side. You know, they call us Nazis all the time, but there's not much I could do about that. But I am saying that this mass movement to one side, I think, says to me that of course there's no climate emergency. It's a strategical thing. Now, for you folks, most of you are individual thinkers. Most of you individual thinkers. Now, I wrestle at Penn State, and what my wrestling coach, who was one of the first men on the beach in Normandy, taught us is the rise of the individual leads to the rise of those around him if he is free to compete, right? So that was the philosophy in the wrestling room at Penn State. And so what happened was, he then would equate that to the way America is supposed to work. You had a guy on this side of town, he's making widgets. He's employing some people. The guy on the other side said, I can make better widgets than him. All of a sudden, everybody's employed, everybody's advancing. Fact of the matter is that nature works bottom up. Most things do, not top down. All right? But what has happened is, this is a big fight between those who believe there's strength in numbers, as opposed to people who want to be free to go see what happens on their own. Because I'll tell you what the big, big danger is And you can tell already in my book, I'm always talking, it's not really about climate. We can only argue for so long about this issue, right? It's about the idea that something else is in control, and we have to conquer that, all right? And of course, the best way, I mean, these are all, you know, when I was in college, one of my college dorm mates is here, Rich Burkhardt, said, I read Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. And that's and see, that's the thing, if you read that, or you read Orwell, or you read Gibbons in The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, you're sitting there going, huh, this is happening right in front of me. Now, I will say this, when my dad went to Texas A&M, and I lived down there, and I'll tell you, I had the best upbringing possible, in that I had a father who was into the weather and encouraged me, and a mother that would feed me, all right? But my dad gave me this book, and I can't remember the exact name. I think it was Why the Weather. And there was a chapter in there on climate change. This is 8 years old, I'm reading this book. It says if the earth starts to warm, more moisture goes into the air, it warms up, but it doesn't warm up enough in the Arctic regions, so it snows more up there, right? Which has been happening. Northern hemisphere snowfall has been increasing, right? So what I'm watching in front of me, and then Penn State was at Penn State taking climatology. At that time it was in the 70s, and the Ice Age was coming, and all that other stuff was going on. They taught the same thing. So what has happened now, and I don't ever demonize people on, well, a lot of the scientists on the other side, I believe, are honest, hardworking people. They just see things different from me. I don't like when they start saying, well, you know, there's no debate. But they are so focused. Just imagine if you spent 30 years being a climate scientist and you're running around with Leonardo DiCaprio and, you know, Al Gore and hanging out, and all this fame and fortune comes to you. Just think to yourself, how can you give that up? How can you possibly give that up? You say, well, what about you, Joe? I said, well, let me tell you something. The more extreme the weather, the more I like it. And I don't mean to say that, okay? I mean, I don't mean to do that bad way. You could ask Rich, there was no bigger weather extreme freak at Penn State than me. And they can't even get close. So when the weather gets extreme, people come to us for forecasts. It's money, right? I get on TV, you know, which is pretty interesting. Broken nose, crooked teeth, big ears, and a balding head, and I made it in America, right? And what a great country. But what I'm saying to you all is that if there's anybody that should want to see this weather get worse and this stuff come true, it would be me. Because it would, hey, the weather is going to be so bad, blah, 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 blah. Come to Joe Bastardi, I love extreme weather, right? But it's just not there. You know, that quote this started, what you stand on today was built yesterday, reach for tomorrow. I'll tell you what I did is I realized a lot of people were a lot smarter than me. I went to school. So I did what my dad taught me to do, and that is look back at the past, and I, you know, I love history right across the board, all right? So weather history particularly. And so what happens is I will see someone say something, and I'll say, no, I can give you 10 examples where it's just as bad or worse. So is there a climate emergency? If you want to change the way our life is, you're going to push that. I don't believe it. And there has never been a better time to be alive in the history of the entire planet. And just remember something, the warmer times were always referred to as climate optimums. Time has expired.
All right, now we move to the next question. It's our fault. Can you address the assertion that it is our fault?
No, it's cow farts.
Or monthly?
Thank you. Well, is climate change our fault? Those of you who studied Latin will remember that this is a null question, a question expecting the answer no. Warming is not unprecedented, so we may not be its chief cause. For instance, between 1694 and 1733, most of you are too young to remember, at that time in central England, there was warming at a rate equivalent to 4.33 Celsius degrees per century. We have seen no such warming since then. It must have been all those Elizabethan SUVs, I suppose. And between 1979 and 2018, there's been warming at a terrifying 1.27 degrees per century, not the 3 degrees that governments have been working on as their mid-range estimate. And then they say there's a consensus, and they always speak like that, there's a consensus about global warming. Well, here's the answer. A paper was published by Cook et al. And Cook is a communist and is quite open about it. I saw him a couple of days ago and he's still a communist, unfortunately. And this paper from the University of Queensland said that they had read 11,944 papers on climate-related topics in the journals of climate science and related subjects in the 21 years 1991 to 2011. And they had found that 97.1% of these 11,944 papers had said that global warming was chiefly caused by us. So I didn't trust communists, can't think why. So I got in touch with Cook and I said, I want to see your data file in which you have listed all these papers and how you marked them. And it took him 3 weeks to send it to me, 3 weeks during which he got massive worldwide publicity for this 97.1% consensus. So, I got the data file and I wrote a computer program to read the whole thing down and count the number of papers that he and his team had said, out of those 11,944, had actually said that global warming of the last few decades was chiefly caused by us, or words to that effect. And the answer was that the people who had said there was a 97.1% consensus had themselves only marked 64 papers out of 11,944, which is, sir, what percentage? Quite right, 0.5%. 0.5% was the consensus they were in fact claiming on their own data file. We then read all 64 papers, only 41 of which said what they'd said. And therefore the actual consensus is 0.3%. So I told this to an eminent citizen of Queensland whom I knew, and he said, do me a witness statement, and I am going to the Queensland police. I'm really angry that a university in this state could publish something so outrageously at odds with what the researchers had themselves actually found and recorded. So he went to the police, and the Queensland police said this: yes, this was a deception. It was a deception which, in normal circumstances, we would treat as a fraud and we would prosecute. But because we cannot quantify how much Cook et al. Gained by writing this bogus paper, and because we cannot quantify how much loss has been caused to taxpayers worldwide by the large number of governments saying there's a 97% consensus about global warming, we are unable to prosecute, though we would like to. So now you know that the supposed consensus is based on a straightforward, I'm going to use the word, scientific fraud, and if the dreadful Cook, the communist, is watching this, then let him sue and see how far he gets in court, because I've got his data file. All I have to do is to show that to the jury, and he's nicked.
What's the question again?
It's our fault.
course it's our fault. Okay, so I wanted to say something about the way temperatures are shown. You know, you get these red bombs that go off. Let me see if I can remember how they... Okay, well, first of all, I guess I should address this first. Are rapidly decreasing climate-related deaths a sign of a climate emergency? We're going the opposite way, okay? The increase in world personal GDP going up, life expectancy going up, carbon emissions, you should see them going up, but look at prosperity versus the diminishing of major poverty. Look at all the food being grown. So I'm trying to figure out, well, what's the emergency? Things are getting better, and of course that would be sort of an emergency because of the fact that the better they get, the happier people are. When people are happy, they're not disgruntled, they don't go out and riot or get dressed up in stuff that you can't tell who they are and bring clubs out and beat people with them, okay? Because if you're happy. But you were talking about the 97%. I'm going to show you what you can do with statistics. And I'm going to get back and use a wrestling example. I was 1-4 at Penn State, all right? 1-4, except I was 1-0 at 167. That's 1,000%. So theoretically, I have the best percentage of any Penn State 167-pounder that's ever been out there, even though there have been guys that have 148 wins, but they lost once, right? So you can manipulate that stuff. And I'll tell you what they manipulate all the time is first of all, how many meteorologists are in here? Dr. Ward's here, right? You guys know what saturation mixing ratios are, right? And you also know that very, 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 very tiny amounts of extra water vapor causes temperatures to react more where it's very cold, all right? So the bang for the buck of all this is up in the Arctic region. For instance, if you increase the amount of water vapor in the air by one-tenth of a gram per kilogram, it affects the temperature where it's -40 and pushes it up to -30. The warming is distorted. My professor at Penn State, Dr. John Kerr, said using temperature as a metric for climate is almost nonsense. Everything is water vapor and the relation water vapor has. Since water vapor is 95% of the greenhouse gases, I guess who's in control. And I guess I have a slide a little bit later about that. But is it our fault? I mean, it's such a crazy question. Is it my fault that my son, who is a great golfer, hasn't won anything on the tour yet? After all, I was his dad. Why haven't you? Can blame anybody for anything, all right? Of course, it all depends on what your idea is about advancing and progressive policies. I'm not talking about progressive, not flow, but progressive, the way the progressives are talking. Everything is upside down today and confused. I believe I'm a liberal, open-minded thinker. Was a John Kennedy Democrat, as Ronald Reagan was, and President Trump was a Democrat until 2009. But what happens is, and I'm all for all kinds of freedom, all right? The more freedom, the better. I personally believe that Dr. Will Happer, who is a premier nuclear physicist in this country, has it down right. And I don't believe Dr. Happer was a lifelong Republican, believe me. But he says that put extra CO2 out there right now because the bands are saturated. It only absorbs back radiation at 13 to 17 microns. Okay, it's already saturated. It's like putting extra coats of paint on the house and expecting the house to change a color. I use this example about a filament. You have a filament in a light bulb, right? I don't care how much electricity you put in, it's not going to get any brighter, right? So we're saturated right now. And what Dr. Happer is saying is, we're in a CO2 drought. Maybe we're naturally coming out of it, and there is a beautiful synergism going on. Since animals exhale 100 times more CO2 than they inhale, right? And plants get that and grow like crazy. The earth is greener than it ever has been in the satellite era, which is astounding that this is supposed to be a green movement, Green New Deal. Well, how much more of a deal do you get? And you realize also, I read a paper a couple of weeks ago, I'm trying to figure out exactly if it's true. If you planted enough trees across the planet, the size of Canada, right? Someone said it'll cost $300 billion to do it. You would create enough greenery to wash out the extra CO2 if you're worried about that. So everybody is into CO2, and everybody's, actually, it's not humans that are now causing it, it's people that get up and have an open mind about things and try to say, well, why don't you look at this and that? I never ask anyone, I'm not going to ask anyone in here to believe me. I'm going to ask you, if it really is important to you, go look at why people are skeptical on it. All right, go back and look at the past and ask yourself, why now and never before? That's why I asked, I did a movie with Bill Nye. I happen to like Bill Nye. A lot of people don't like him. I like him because I think he's done a great amount for science, and I'm not going to get mad at a person because where he is right now. But I said, Bill, there's no evidence in the ice cores of this. Where's the warming? It was much warmer before. We have, I'll end here quickly here. There's a glacier up in northwest Alaska that's retreating, all right? Now, if it's going to be our fault, how is it that as it retreats, there's a 1,000-year-old forest that's being revealed underneath it? How did that grow? So when you consider that it's all our fault, I think it goes back to the original statement by Mencken that there's a lot of things going on here that aren't about science and aren't about climate, all right? So anyway, that's all I have to say for now.
Okay, so we've talked about climate change is real and it's urgent. We've talked about it's our fault. Now let's talk about the assertion that if we take immediate action, we can remedy the situation. What about it?
Well, now you know that only 0.3% of climate scientists published after peer review in learned journals actually consider that it is our fault. So in that case, does climate change need fixing at all? Well, my answer to that is no, it doesn't need fixing, and there's no need to hurry. Let's look at just some of the indicators here. Sea level change. Now, the true rate of sea level change was measured by the most accurate satellite we had between 2004 and 2012, when it died, unfortunately, a meteorite hit it. But in that time, it showed that sea level was rising globally at a terrifying rate equivalent to 1.5 inches per century. Not exactly terrifying if you happen to own an expensive coastal property somewhere. And sea level rise, as reported by the usual suspects, is insignificant. In fact, between 2003 and 2008, sea level actually declined worldwide, but it was reported as having risen sharply over the same period because of a thing called a glacial isostatic adjustment. Now, whether or not that glacial isostatic adjustment was justified is not for me as a mere layman to say, though I beg leave to doubt it. However, one thing I can tell you, without any fear of contradiction, is that whatever else a glacial isostatic adjustment is, it is not a real or actual sea level rise. Therefore, the figures you see for sea level rise are bogus, they are fictional, they are simply made up. In fact, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the political body which pretends to be scientific, has had to reduce its predictions of sea level rise in each of its successive reports from 1990, 1995, 2001 and 2007, going down, going down, going down. And they dare to tell us it's worse than we thought. Well, so it is if your grant money depends on pretending there's a problem which is plainly disappearing with each new measurement they take. Global sea ice loss is very small. In fact, if you had a heartbeat as regular as this, you would be regarded as a very healthy little planet. And the Palmer Drought Severity Index shows no particular change since 1900. So if they tell you drought is increasing in the United States or anywhere else, no, it is not. In fact, in the last 30 years, as you can see in this graph from the most detailed survey of the percentage of land area under drought, that percentage has been falling throughout the period during which our sins of omission have been greatest and the warming is supposed to be happening. But the drought is not responding. Why? Because if the world warms up, then the atmosphere can carry near exponentially more water vapor, which is kind of not a good thing if you're trying to pretend there's going to be drought. So then, hurricane activity, that is decreasing, and indeed we would expect this, because warmer weather reduces the temperature differentials on which storminess depends, certainly in the extratropics and arguably also in the tropics where most of the hurricanes occur. And forest fires, you've heard a lot about those in both California and Montana last year. Here is the global picture. Forest fires, as you can see, the numbers of millions of hectares burned are declining with each new decade as the CO2 concentration rises and as therefore the moisture in the atmosphere increases, and therefore there is an inhibition which tends to prevent forest fires. So why then did the forest fire in California happen? Because they had power lines running over forests and they hadn't kept the forest clear of the power lines. Why did it happen in Montana? Because they haven't cleared the scrub from fallen trees, because the enviros say they must leave them in situ. Therefore, one little lightning strike, one little spark, and the whole lot goes up. Millions of acres, lives endangered, houses destroyed, forestry destroyed, all because of the global warming extremists who say we cannot tamper with nature. Well, if you don't tamper with nature, you're going to get forest fires far bigger than any that we ourselves would be likely to cause. In the United States, notwithstanding the warm weather we've enjoyed today, heat waves are less common than they were in the 1930s. There has been a relentless decline in the incidence of US heat waves right across the last 100 years. How many of you have seen that reported in any mainstream news medium? US heat-related deaths, therefore, are tumbling because hot weather is actually better than cold. Oh, and then you might be worried about ocean acidification. Well, the first thing is the last time the ocean was acid was 54 million years ago. I remember it well. And it hasn't happened since, and under modern conditions it cannot happen because the oceans are powerfully buffered by the rocks in which the ocean basins lie. It cannot happen. Any reasonably competent geologist will tell you that. And that is why the ocean is bound to remain pronouncedly alkaline. The pH, which is the acid-base balance of the ocean, will change at the moment, even if you take the very few places where they've measured this for any length of time. They've never done a proper whole ocean survey because they know perfectly well it won't show that it's becoming more acid. But in one or two places, for local reasons, it is, but only at a rate of 0.2 pH units per century. They don't report that in the mainstream newspapers. And as you can see, acidification is really a totalitarian fad. What you've got going on here is they began writing papers on ocean acidification in about 2005, and then all the Me Too lefties piled in and said, let's all get some grants to write about this new supposed threat. But it isn't actually a real threat. And as for whether warmer weather is going to make matters better or worse for us, actually the EU did a study hoping to find that if we had even 5.4 Celsius of warming over the next 80 years, and don't worry, that's not going to happen. Even then, they found that the net loss of life would be the other way around. There'd be a net gain of 94,000 souls because it's cold weather that's the killer, not hot weather. So therefore, it isn't going to happen as they say. Most of the disasters they predict are simply not going to occur. So enjoy the sunshine.
You know, I was watching the Senate hearings in 2015 and with former EPA Director Gina McCarthy. And when she said what she said, she was questioned about how much this is actually going to save. I thought, was she sabotaging the entire thing? How can no one in the media pick up on this? What she said was she was questioned, I forget who questioned it, said, is it true that what you're proposing will save only 0.01 Celsius over 30 years. She never really answered that. She said, that's not the value of this. The value of it is that, it'll paraphrase her, it'll show that America is serious and spur global action. So now let me get this straight when I'm thinking about this. First of all, say 0.01 C. You can't, it's well within the error bar of instruments. But secondly, if not too many people have followed our example in things that we are real good at, right? We're the greatest experiment in freedom of man that there's ever been. Yet look at how many countries aren't following that example at all. So what makes you think? I'll tell you, if I was sitting in China, I go, yeah, well, I'll tell you, it's warming up the U.S. You cut every emission that you can get your hands on, right? The other thing is, too, is when you look at the cost. So the question, I believe, is, do we have to do something now? Or I believe that, okay, what is the question exactly? I forgot. Jim?
Yes.
What's the question?
The question is, if we do something about it now.
Okay, bingo. I actually remembered that. Listen, I'll tell you what, I'm losing. It's funny because my talks, they cut. You know, all of a sudden I'll go off on a tangent, and then I have to ask the audience what the heck I was talking about. In fact, that's what just happened now. So, but if you look, for instance, CO2 is 0.04% of the atmosphere. That's 0.004. Man, human beings, have put in 0.001, 1/4 of that. All right, humans are responsible for it. The evil United States is responsible for 15% of that. So I guess we're responsible for 0.0004015. Now, that's over the last 45 or 50 years. So if you divide that, the yearly amount of increase from us is 0.000000, I think, 33 or whatever the heck, I have to look at it. And then you have these states that are enacting climate policy based on that. Now let's divide that by 50, right? Each individual state. You take the state of Rhode Island, all right? The Senator of the White House over there. You are stopping 0.0000000066 increase in carbon dioxide. That's absurd. And again, it goes back to what Gina McCarthy was saying, that this is not really about actually saving the planet. Even AOC's chief of staff said, well, it's an economic plan. It's never supposed to be about climate. I have some extra graphs here. Who's against the greening of the planet? Can I get your hands? Are you afraid that more CO2 is going to turn things around the other way? The planet's getting greener by the day. I thought that was a good thing. You know, when I was a kid, I was a tree hugger. I really was. Well, the reason I was a tree hugger was the first Earth Day, 1970, I believe it was. We had a play at my high school, Mainland High School. And all the cheerleaders were dressed up as trees, and they were in the play. I'm going to become a tree hugger. I'll tell you what, let's put CO2 in the air, trees are starting to hug people. Now, I think I got into this before. So do we need to do something now? How come warmer times were always climate optimums? Why is it not why is it a climate emergency now? All right, does anybody see any linkage between CO2 and temperature in this chart? And that's why a lot of geologists don't believe this at all. You talk to most geologists, they're never included in the surveys. This is like what, remember those coffee table books where you had to cross your eyes to see the pattern? I guess that's what you got to do with that. Greenland, all right? Greenland's supposedly a canary in the coal mine. It's been warmer before. There's a hockey stick at the end, all right? Now, I don't think I have time to do this, but I'll get into this whole water vapor thing, and what I call a distortion of warming, and why the reason it could actually lead to less tropical cyclones is because the warmer it gets, you're going to change the global wind oscillation, for one. The mean surface pressures change, and you don't like low pressure to the north. if you're a storm coming out of the south. It ruins the convergence, okay? So I was just going to get into that example because hurricanes are being weaponized. I mean, 2016, you had a tropical wave that took 11 days at the height of the season to develop into a hurricane in the Northeast Gulf, or mean Category 1, and what does Hillary Clinton say? This is a sign of global warming. What, an actual hurricane, right? During hurricane season, that's even worse. But no, any action we take now is strictly a show, all right? And you go back to 2015, I believed Gina McCarthy then, I believe her now. I just can't believe that no one in the media picked up on that. That it was only 0.01C, or as President Obama said, 0.03C over a century, right? Anyway, okay, that's it for me now.
All right. So we've covered it's real and urgent. We've covered it's our fault. We've covered if we take immediate action, we can remedy it. Finally, I'd like to ask each of you to talk about the statement that it is settled science.
This is another normal question. Is it settled science? No, of course it's not. Or as they say in the Bronx, settled, schmeddled. Fact is, they screwed up their physics, and this is going to astonish you. And my team has been working on this for the last 2 or 3 years, and we're just polishing off the final stages of this. As you've already seen, predicted warming is 2.4 times the warming that their own data for radiative forcing caused by man and the radiative imbalance would lead them to expect. Now, most of their predicted warming comes from what is called the feedback response. The direct warming is that 1 Kelvin on the left, and all the rest is feedback response. You'll see the models and the IPCC reckon that it's about multiplying the direct warming by 3, and some of the sillier extreme papers by the climate communists multiply it by up to 10. So there appears to be a crisis because of the silly papers. But actually, as we'll see, those extreme forecasts are based on this material misdefinition of what a climate feedback actually is. And they say it's a perturbation in one climate quantity causing a change in another, which in turn causes that one to change, which is a piece of gobbledygook. What they've left out is that feedback does not only respond to changes in temperature, it responds to the entire temperature that happens to exist at any given moment. The feedback loop in the climate is an inanimate object. It cannot say, ooh, I'm going to respond only to this bit of the temperature that I sense exists. It has to respond to the entire temperature. And yet if you say that to just about any climatologist, they say, no, 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 feedback only responds to changes in temperature. They forgot the sunshine. Because the sunshine, even if there were no greenhouse gases and before any feedbacks, the temperature on Earth, according to their figures, would be 255 Kelvin. And that engenders quite a large feedback response, but they attribute all of that large feedback response to the mere 10.3 Kelvin of additional greenhouse gas warming from the naturally occurring non-condensing greenhouse gases that were present in the atmosphere in 1850. The natural greenhouse effect is about 33 Kelvin. You can see how it's calculated here. You take the actual temperature as it was measured in 1850, you deduct the emission temperature, and the difference is the natural greenhouse effect. Now, warming from the naturally occurring non-condensing greenhouse gases present in the air in 1850, including the feedback response, comes to 33 Kelvin. And what that means is there was no feedback response to that great big 255 Kelvin emission temperature in the current mid-range estimates that are being relied upon by official climatology. They forgot the sun was shining. As you can see, here it is, no feedback response at all to the emission temperature from the fact that the sun is shining, except of course in Scotland. And that in response to the tiny natural greenhouse gas warming to 1850, only 10 Kelvin or 1/25th of the emission temperature, suddenly that on its own produces 23 Kelvin of feedback response. That's how they get to multiply by 3 the direct warming from greenhouse gases and pretend we're going to get 3.35 Kelvin of warming per doubling of CO2. Well, no, we're not, because they screwed up. They got it wrong. If you see here how they do it, they forget to include the emission temperature together with the natural greenhouse gas warming up to 1850 and the man-made greenhouse gas warming of only 1 Kelvin after 1850. They only feed the natural and man-made greenhouse gas warming into the feedback loop. They forget that the emission temperature is responsible for nearly all of the feedbacks that they are blaming on greenhouse gases. Here is the corrected diagram. This is what's known as a block diagram, and there are some control engineers here because it was from control theory that these block diagrams were borrowed, and this methodology of feedback was borrowed. But the climatologists whose knuckles drag along the ground had not understood what they had borrowed. They had screwed up comprehensively. Now, would any control engineer like to stand up and say, am I right or am I right? Well, the answer is yes, I'm right. And here you can see that if you give the thickness of the lines, depending on the magnitude of the temperature concerned, you can see that nearly all of it is the pale yellow from the sun, and then the bright yellow just above that on the right, that's the feedback caused by the warming from the sun, and just above that is everything else. That's how small the effect that we can possibly have is, and a lot of that is natural, only a tiny bit of that is us. So the corrected warming from doubled CO2, once you correct their enormous error of physics, is not 3.35 Kelvin, it's not even the 1.4 Kelvin we calculated earlier from their own data. It's just 1.15 Kelvin, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the climate problem. They can no longer pretend that global warming is a problem because the whole global warming scare is predicated upon this one mistake. They got it wrong, they screwed up, global warming isn't a problem. The corrected figures show just 1.16 Celsius of global warming per doubling of CO2. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not enough to be a problem. And so it's game over.
That's settled science. Settled science to me is, water freezes 32, unless it's polluted or something, or there's gravity. The sun's hot. That's settled science. So I'm not going to argue with that. One of the big problems I think climatologists have is they don't forecast. So there's no bottom line to anything, right? My business, I'm in the private sector. If I'm not right, I'm going to get fired. All right, even. Sometimes if I am right, I get fired because of the economy. But the point of the matter is, and I love this stuff, I love to compete. I mean, I wasn't a real good wrestler, but I'm doing what God made me to do, and I'm going to do it as hard as I can until I get pulled off the field. And it has nothing to do with trying to put this person down or that person down. Simply a guy that wants to stand up and say, this is what I believe. You don't have to believe me. Go look at what you want to go look at, but at least look at the other side of the issue. So I don't have any, and I don't mean to be Debbie Downer here. The science is not settled, obviously. So Lord Monckton's is. I will take his side of the argument there. But unfortunately, I believe the solution to all this is settled. All right. I don't think there's any stopping the tide that's coming. It's almost like sometimes I feel if you're going to try to debate this, you're William Travis at the Alamo, right? And yet he still stood because that's what he does. All right, you do what you're made to do, okay? But don't sit there. I don't sit there and think, oh God, please help me win this battle or that battle. I'm nobody's hero. All right. I'm someone that worships my Heavenly Father, and am amazed every day. I'm amazed more at the design of the system. You realize, Eric Liddell said in, if you saw the movie Chariots of Fire, he said, God made me fast and I feel His pleasure when I run. If you remember that, that was a great line, all right? And that guy, the way he won his gold medal was lights out. He said, I ran half the race on me, and then the other half God took over, like that. Well, God made me to love the weather, and every day I see His majesty. So the infinite power of the weather, and the power of the atmosphere, and the fact that it can do things, and do them very, very quickly, right, renders the increase of 1 molecule of CO2 out of every 10,000 molecules of air over a 100-year period very, very, very tiny. I say it's zero. No. But you have to be able. I've always said that I'm the dumbest man in the room, and my dad says, "Don't say that."
I'm dumber.
No, I'm dumb. But you know what? If you're the dumbest man in the room and you truly want to get smarter, you see everything. There was no wrestler I ever met at Penn State that was worse than me when they walked on, but I improved quite a bit because I wanted to improve, right? And I was the worst guy on the team, so I did more to look at. Now, again, I call it the curse of talent. I see a lot with athletes. They're so darn good that they don't know what to do when confronted with a situation that they've never seen before, because they're always winding up winning. If you are a top-level climatologist that's never forecast the weather and understands attribution to different factors, you're naturally going to jump on the only thing you believe, which in this case is CO2. The weather teaches you that. Now, I'm going to go over this real quick. This is a practical example of why the hysteria over hurricanes, and we got hurricane season coming up, and anything anything that happens is going to be blamed on. But the practical example related to hurricanes, typhoons, is if you look at, for instance, the increase in water vapor between 2005 to 2017 in the winter. Now I want you to look up in the Arctic and look over the tropics, okay? There's an increase of water vapor over the Arctic, but the tropics are far more impressive with the increase in water vapor. And this is 1,000 millibars, so it's right near the surface. Yet where is all the warming? Why isn't it warming? Okay, why isn't it warming in the tropics? It's warming in the Arctic. And look at that. See that purple dinosaur, this Barney up there north of Scandinavia. Look where the warming shows up, and it's because of saturation mixing ratios. If you understand what water vapor is about, that you look what happens between 0.12 and 0.21. The atmosphere has a 10-degree difference there. But you get into the tropics, and you need an increase of 100 grams to cause the kind of warming that's going on. So what's happened here, and this is what's glorious, the trapping hot spots over the tropics, they're all going the other way. It's drying out. So what happens when it dries out? It means a lower wet bulb temperature. That's why hurricanes are not increased dramatically. All right? Because what happens is you're distorting the natural pattern of the earth, and that changes everything. But that is where we're supposed to be seeing all this water vapor. Because you get water vapor at 400 millibars over the tropics. What's that going to do? That's going to trap more heat. The other thing I want to bring up real quick too is what happened to the perma-drought? You guys remember 2013 after those 3 hot summers? The plains were supposed to be in a perma-drought, California perma-drought. It reverses dramatically. It was especially hideous in 2012 when they were saying that this was going on, and all it did was mimic 52 through 54 in Texas, and then reversed by 57. I know a lot about 1954 in Texas because I was an Aggie fan, and that was the year of the Junction Boys down there. This is from Dr. Ryan Maui, okay? There's no increase in major hurricane frequency. Globally, it looks cyclical, again from Dr. Maui. No increase in frequency. You can get on Ryan's site and you can see a bunch of this stuff. 30s, 40s, and 50s were far worse. Are you kidding me? Look at the 1940s. You know, remember that old joke? That old joke about, hey, if you believe that, I'll sell you some swampland in Florida. You know, that was back That's the reason why Florida used to get hit. People go, oh, well, the atmosphere will teach Trump a lesson, we'll flood Mar-a-Lago. I'd be saying, yeah, you're right. And then you get the 1950s, okay? And I wasn't put to bed with the story of the three little bears. I was put to bed with the story of the three big hurricanes, Carol, Ed, and Hazel. My time has expired, but let me do my conclusion here, all right? You know what? If I could have wrestled the way I talk, I would have been national champion. Man can do nothing to stop planetary cycles. The people pushing the climate emergency apparently are against a better life, more liberty, and greater chance to pursue happiness. 3, it gives me a chance. I'm very thankful for people on the other side. I have gratitude to everything because it's lighting people. I don't care who you are, you got light in you. I believe that type of thing. But when they say what they say, it gives us a chance to say, well, look at this, and this. So there's a chance to do that. As far as the models, they're great tools to add to the building of science, but put the wrong tool in the wrong person's hand and the results are not going to be positive, okay? No one would want to see me try to build a house, put it that way. Okay, that's that for
now. All right, thank you. So, as I said at the beginning, we would like to invite everyone to submit questions with on the cards that we have provided. So while you're taking a few minutes to do that, I'd like to invite Fran Wendelboe to come up and talk a little bit about the 603 Alliance and some thanks to Granite Grok and Camp Constitution as well.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. If you did not take the time when you arrived to sign in at the check-in desk, please do so. There are also a form for you to ask to be added to our email list so we can tell you about good events like this that we hold in the future. And it asks about Initiative 20, which is our effort to recruit and train more conservative, liberty-loving, conservative candidates in 2020. I also would like to take this time to thank a few people. First of all, to thank our wonderful speakers for appearing here tonight, enlightening us. We'd also like to thank Camp Constitution, who were so nice as to provide Lord Monkton's availability to us tonight. Also, you may have noticed the folks from Granite Grok. We want to thank them for being here and filming. It will be on their website. We all know the Grok. And I'd like to thank the St. Anselm's Institute of Politics for allowing us to meet here. You know, some people think we're kind of riffraff, and so it's nice to be welcomed at a great institution. So, some of you, I hope most of you, have heard of 603 Alliance and are aware of some of the things we've done. We are winding up to our 5th year in existence. There were a group of people who got together before the last presidential election, and we were very concerned with 16 Republican candidates, a lot of them good conservatives, that a moderate was going to come right up the middle and we'd be stuck with a middle-of-the-road moderate instead of a strong conservative. We actually held a caucus, an Iowa-style caucus, attended by hundreds of people, who voted. And we pledged that we would endorse and get behind the candidate who won that caucus. That winner happened to be Senator Ted Cruz. And we did pretty well, considering out of 16 candidates, he was the last man standing to President Trump. I've been very pleased with President Trump. I still love Ted Cruz, and he's there fighting for us conservatives every day. So, where do we go from here? In 2016, we got involved in recruiting and training candidates for the New Hampshire House of Representatives. We trained over 80 candidates. We had a much higher percentage of victories, both in the primary and in the general election, than people who did not attend our school or people who were trained by the New Hampshire GOP. The GOP was a little disorganized back then, and people really didn't know where to turn, and many of them turned to the 603 Alliance, and we were glad to be there. Hopefully the GOP is back on its feet and headed in the right direction, but we are going to still be there in 2020, and we are going to help good candidates get trained and elected. So that's what we are now calling Initiative 20. I urge you to talk to your friends and neighbors about running for office. I think there's so many of them that are so disenfranchised and upset that they may just need a little urging to get involved and run for office. I served 14 years in the House, made that princely $100 a year salary, but I have to tell you, it's the most rewarding thing. You learn so much about everything. And while our Republican representatives have been very frustrated in the minority, we must turn this around in 2020. The abyss we are upon, and if we don't do something, I don't think any of us will recognize the country that will be left after the 2020 elections if the Democrats continue their majorities and take the White House. So, that having been said, you were supposed to be writing down your questions and handing them in. Jim, how are we doing on that? Are we ready?
If you have a card, raise your hand.
I'll send them in when you're ready.
So Fran, one more thing, could you just, I know we have a lot of elected officials here, you mentioned
thank
people
you,
who have
Jim.
run for office, and I'd just like to acknowledge those folks.
For our speakers especially, I would love for them to see how many of you are either currently in the New Hampshire House, in the New Hampshire Senate, candidate for office, a mayor. We have the mayor of Franklin here. So could we just have you stand up, all of you who are present or past elected officials in the state of New Hampshire. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank all of you for being here tonight. At least it's a little air conditioned in here, better than staying at home in the heat. You don't have air conditioning. Bad people that we are using air conditioning. So, 603 Alliance will be there to help people. We do have our brochure that was on every seat. Please take one. Gives a little bit more information about us. Tells how to contact us. We're always looking for input. We're always looking for volunteers. And we're always looking for, if you have a few extra dollars to help us with our mission. We were extremely fortunate a couple of years ago that Steve Bannon, before his fall from grace, came to New Hampshire and did a fundraising event for us that was very successful and provided the funds for us to operate completely with that 2016 election, and all the training that we did was totally free of charge to the candidates, and there were over 80 of them. So financial contributions always help. Thank you. Jim?
Thank you. Okay, our team is sorting the questions. What I would like to do is perhaps to dive into a few questions that we have already. And this really could be aimed at either of you, so if you would like to respond, just chime in. How do you respond to the assertion that 9 out of the 10 warmest years on record have occurred since 2005?
Right.
Agreed.
Let us go back 750 million years to the Neo-Proterozoic era. I remember that well too. Now in that time, the carbon dioxide concentration was 7,000 parts per million, and yet the planet did not fry. Now the concentration, is it 70,000 parts per million? No, it's 400 parts per million. And if we tried as we might and emitted all the carbon dioxide that we could possibly dig up from the ground and burn the various coal, oil and gas, we couldn't really push it up much above 1,200, whatever we do. So are we facing some kind of climate disaster, even if they are right about how much warming a doubling of CO2 might cause? The answer is no. So this is not an unprecedented situation. We have seen far, far higher concentrations of CO2 in the past. We have seen far, far higher temperatures in the past. Typically, over most of the last 500, 600 million years, it's been 10 Celsius degrees higher than it is today. If you go back just over the last 810,000 years, then the temperatures have varied only by about 3 Celsius up or down from where they are today. And that is because under modern conditions the temperature can't change very much. So don't worry, be happy, enjoy the sunshine.
I just want to say that I think that in the satellite era, 9 of the last 10 years are the warmest on record. Well, it's like having a guy that bench presses 400 pounds, bench pressing 401 pounds, and saying, there, look at how much improvement I made. The fact is, folks, the hotter it is, I shouldn't say hotter, warmer. The earth is not hot, it's not burning up. All right, they put those red colors on there. It's, what's the temperature, 57, 58 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yeah,
whatever. But that, most of us be wearing sweaters during that time, okay, if it's 57, 58 degrees. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to exaggerate this situation, and if you understand thermodynamics, you understand energy and how energy drives the system. The warmer it gets, the tougher it is to get warmer. Not only that, you got Le Chatelier's principle, it's a French word, Le Chatelier's principle, which says all systems are searching for an equilibrium, and basically they can't find it. So you see the fight back going on. When you saw all this rain in the Central Plains, that is a sign that the atmosphere is not warming according to what they're saying, because when you warm up aloft, you do increase the water vapor, but you warm up, like they said, a big heat trapping ridge over the United States, guess what? It's not going to rain. That's why they bid on that Dust Bowl idea, that perma-drought idea. So all these things, just remember that. The more extreme something is, the harder it is to get more extreme. What they're trying to sell you is what they call a tipping point, where it just gets here. You know, it's not the stock market that breaks through a technical position.
So it's a very complex topic, and it's hard sometimes for people to talk about climate because of the great level of detail there. So one of the questions that has been asked is, what's the best quick reference? I don't know if quick reference is even possible, but to the extent that people can find facts as concisely and well organized as possible, where should they go? What's the best place for them to go to?
Go to YouTube and watch any speech by the Viscount Marquess of Britain.
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting in that it's like, you know, someone went up to Derek Jeter and says, where can I quickly learn to play shortstop, right? We're Red Sox fans around here. I'm just saying that there's no quick and dirty way to just get this stuff down if you really want to dig into it. But common sense has a lot to do with the answer. Common sense. And knowing what happened before and understanding some of the basics of the way weather and climate react and understand how the Earth has always been going back and forth should lead to the intuitive idea that there is a very strong possibility this might be natural. How's that?
And there is a website you can go to which is called whatsupwiththat.com. Very good. That is an extremely good website. Most of the pieces, other than the ones I write, of course, are in relatively plain American English, so that even you can understand.
I should plug, you know, my book is a compilation of blogs that I did in the Patriot Post, but if every Google Joe Bastardi Patriot Post, there's like 300 blogs in there covering various situations, if you want to go reference that.
Read The Moral Case for Fossil
Alex Epstein, that says it all.
Yeah, I've heard very good things about that book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. We had a couple of questions about the effect of, or the potential effect of solar activity, the current grand solar minimum, solar wind, sunspots, in potential magnetic pole shift. But can you talk about some of these other potential effects on climate?
Let's start with the sun. The sun is the big enchilada. We are frankly not. The sun is where it's at. Now, at the moment, we're going through what might prove to be a grand solar minimum. And the last time a really grand solar minimum happened was about 300 years ago. I remember it well. And at that time, the world got quite a lot colder because there were virtually no sunspots on the sun for around 60 or 70 years. It was a really big solar minimum. We haven't had anything quite like that since. Some people, Professor Willie Soon, for instance, say that we might be going into one of those again now. If so, then we can expect it to get a little bit colder, but thanks to our having emitted plenty of CO2 into the atmosphere, it certainly won't be as bad as it was 300 years ago. So there are advantages to emitting CO2, and it's worth looking at some of those advantages. For one thing, the net primary productivity of plants, which is the total plant biomass, the weight of all the leaves and branches of trees and plants on Earth, has actually gone up by between 15 and 30% over the last 30 years, depending on which scientific paper you believe. And that is an enormous increase thanks to what's called CO2 fertilization. So when you've got the sun shining, and there are cosmic rays also, that influences it. But if we take the major effect of the sun, supposing it does decline, it would have to decline for at least 60 years before we would really notice any cooling. Because as far as we can tell, the change in temperature goes in accordance with what's called the 60-year time integral of the solar radiation. Because the solar radiation from peak to trough of its natural 11-year cycle varies only by something like 0.02%. It's a very, very small change. So the sun does have an influence, but only if you integrate its influence over relatively long periods. We can cause a much shorter term influence by putting CO2 into the atmosphere, but that is far more beneficial through plant fertilization than it is harmful. So bring on the CO2, keep on emitting it, and we will green the planet together.
There's a lot of heat stored in the oceans. And I think that, you know, I get into arguments with these, you know, little ice age now, a lot of people, and that I don't think they like me taking my stand on it, but temperatures aren't going anywhere down until we get rid of the heat in the oceans. Now, the way I look at it is before that last grand solar minimum, there was another one that was 200 years long before. We've had 200 years of high sunspot activity preceding this one, and the result has to be different. So I'm not worried about the Earth going into, you know, where it was back when Lord Monckton was skating across the Thames back there. He says he's been here since 750. Maybe he is. Maybe he's actually God. My son thinks he's God.
No, I'm an angel.
All right, Joe, this is aimed at you. Have any of Al Gore's predictions from An Inconvenient Truth come true?
I thought the Inconvenient Truth, I had the idea for, like Bill Gray, I thought said it best. Wow, I love the movie, and I love The Wizard of Oz too, right? So It seems like everything he's said, I mean, the Arctic ice cap's still there, right? Isn't it up there? By the way, if you melted the entire Arctic ice cap, what do you think the net result of sea level change would be?
Zero, good man.
Yeah.
Because the ice is floating.
That's real interesting. But then come the feedbacks and all this other stuff that's going on. But, you know, the hurricane thing should have disqualified him right off the bat. He said, and that's what they do. They use the latest as the greatest and then project it forward. And so there's so many different things that he said. I think wasn't it in the UK they did a study on it, about 19 things, and they were using it in school to teach kids. They said, no.
Perhaps I can take up the story, because it was I who initiated the court case against Al Gore's movie in 2007 in the High Court, the Administrative Court, on judicial review of a balmy decision by the then socialist British government, not only to pay full price for 20,000 copies of this leaden, ludicrous film, but then to circulate them to every school in England and require the kids to sit and watch this mawkish sci-fi comedy horror movie. And so a businessman came to me and he said he wanted to stop this. I said, well, you have to do it by way of judicial review, and I will write the scientific testimony in that case, which I did. And then the first lot of lawyers screwed up and we lost the case. So I said, you must fire them, get proper lawyers, and I will instruct them this time. So then the new lawyers said that they could win the case purely on the political arguments. I said, no, you have to do it on the science, or the High Court won't buy it. So they said, no, we're the lawyers, we know best, and they failed too, and they came back with their tails between their legs, and I said, you are to write to the judge in the case and ask him whether he actually watched Gore's movie before saying that innocent school children could be subjected to it. And so they said, we can't do that. I said, those are the instructions of the person paying for this case. Now get off your wobbly bottoms and do as you're told. So they wrote rather in trepidation to the judge and said, did you actually see the movie before you took a judgment on this? And it turned out that he hadn't. He didn't reply, so I instructed them to write again to the High Court saying, we want another judge who's prepared to do this fairly. And boogamy, we got one. So he then actually heard the case, and I then wrote the scientific testimony. It was put in the name of the late Professor Bob Carter and the still very much alive and kicking Professor Richard Lindzen, perhaps the finest atmospheric physicist the world has ever seen. And so with those two names on it, the moment we handed that in to the other side, they caved in and said, okay, it's a fair cop, how much money would you like? £250,000, we said, and that's what the government had to pay. And they also had to circulate the film with 70 pages of corrective guidance, correcting the various errors in the film, one of which the judge said about the sea level. He said, the Armageddon scenario that Gore depicts is not based on any scientific view.
So one of the criticisms we hear is that people who are expressing a climate change skeptic position are in the pay of fossil fuel companies. On the other side, we hear people asking questions like this: are there any solutions to the climate change issue that don't give politicians more power and more of people's money? So, two different ways perhaps of expressing that. One side says it's the oil companies, another side says it's big government advocates. What say you?
Unaccountably, my check from ExxonMobil has not arrived this month, or come to think of it, in any previous month. I have received no emolument of any kind from any fossil fuel company. I wish I had. I shall be happy to read out my bank account details and you can all send me a fat check. I'm very happy to take your cash, but it will not change my opinion on this, which is based, as you, I hope, have seen by now, on straightforward scientific research. That is how science is done, and it doesn't matter even if we were paid by fossil fuel companies. The other side are paid by governments who want to prove the case that global warming is a problem. Are they somehow to be trusted because governments are funding them? That, in my experience, is the last person you can trust.
But, you know, about a year ago, I guess, I gave up standing outside the mailbox waiting for my check from the Koch brothers. They're the ones that are demonized the most. And, you know, you've got a classic case, I think, of the other side projecting what is actually going on with them on our side of the issue. It's taken, I mean, the only reason I'm in this is because I love the weather and climate. So you know, I don't get any benefits out of this. As a matter of fact, if you really looked at it logically, the way things are, I mean, Bill Nye was in my house and said, "Joe, do you realize how influential you would be if you came to our side?" I thought I was talking to Lord Vader. Actually, Lord Vader may have been mild. Maybe it was like Lucifer trying to tempt me or something like that. And I said, "Bill," I says, "I'm not out to save the world." See, he's out to save the world, right? So I think most of the money, power, media is on the other side. And, you know, I've been accused of, you know what's going on, but you like your Twitter followers and all that stuff. It's just such nonsense, right? I'm 64, I really don't care.
And as to the solutions that don't involve government, since, as I hope I have demonstrated this evening, this is a non-problem based on an elementary and catastrophic error of physics by those who are demanding solutions, I can tell you the solution. Go away, get your science correct. You will therefore find that there is a non-problem, and the correct solution to a non-problem is to have the courage to do nothing.
And with that, I know we had quite a few questions. I apologize to those of you for whom we did not get to your question. I think that our speakers may be around for a few minutes afterwards. We did also have a question about the slides. I'll say that with the permission of the speakers, we will share those through Granite Grok, but the video will certainly be on Granite Grok. With that, thank you very much for your time this evening. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
Grok TV.